10 Irish surnames created to hide a family's true origins. What if the surname you've carried your entire life isn't the surname your ancestors were born with? For most people, a family name feels permanent, something passed down unchanged from one generation to the next. But Irish history tells a very different story. Over the centuries, countless Irish families found themselves living through war, conquest, religious persecution, famine, and mass emigration. In those difficult times, a surname could become more than a family identity. It could become a burden. A distinctly Gaelic name might reveal where you came from, the clan you belong to, or even your political and religious loyalties. In certain periods of Irish history, those connections could affect your opportunities, your safety, or your ability to find work. For some families, changing a surname wasn't about abandoning their heritage. It was about protecting the next generation. Some names were translated into English. Others were shortened until they barely resembled the originals. Some families quietly dropped ancient clan prefixes like O and Mac, while others adopted entirely different surnames that blended more easily into an English-speaking world. Generations passed. The new names remained. And eventually, many descendants had no idea that their family's original identity had been hidden beneath a different surname. That's why tracing Irish ancestry can be so fascinating. The name on your birth certificate may only tell part of the story. The real story could be waiting several centuries further back. It's important to remember that not everyone with the surnames in this video shares the same family history. Many names have multiple origins, and a surname alone can never prove where your ancestors came from. But each of the names we're about to explore has been connected, at different times, to families whose earlier Gaelic identities became less visible through translation, anglicization, or social change. So, could your surname be hiding a very different Irish past? If you enjoy uncovering forgotten family histories, ancient kingdoms, and the surprising stories behind everyday surnames, subscribe to Unknown Discoveries. Every week, we explore the mysteries hidden in names, bloodlines, and the people who shaped history. Let's begin with one of the most common surnames in Ireland. A name that, for many families, concealed an older Gaelic identity: Smith. The first surname on our list is one almost everyone recognizes: Smith. Today, Smith is one of the most common surnames in the English-speaking world. It originally describes someone who worked as a blacksmith, farrier, or metalworker. But in Ireland, the story isn't always that simple. During the centuries when English became the dominant language of government, law, and trade, some Gaelic families translated their original surnames into English equivalents. In certain cases, descendants of families whose names were linked to craftsmen or similar occupations gradually adopted the surname Smith, making their older Gaelic identity far less obvious. For modern genealogists, a Smith family in Ireland can sometimes trace its roots back to a completely different surname hidden several generations earlier. But occupational names weren't the only ones that changed. Sometimes, entire clan identities were quietly reshaped. One of the best examples is Green. At first glance, Green appears to be an ordinary English surname. Yet throughout Ireland, some families adopted names like Green during periods of social and political change, particularly when English spellings became more practical or more acceptable than traditional Gaelic ones. In other cases, Green arrived through English or Welsh settlers and later became intertwined with Irish communities, making it difficult to distinguish one family's origins from another's without historical records. That's one of the greatest challenges in Irish genealogy. Two people can share exactly the same surname and have completely different family histories. The next name is even more surprising. White. White has existed in Ireland for centuries, introduced by Norman and English settlers after the 12th century. But over time, some Irish families also adopted the surname through translation or social adaptation, particularly when older Gaelic names became increasingly difficult to use in official records. By the 19th century, a family carrying the surname White might have Norman roots, English roots, or an older Irish lineage whose original surname had gradually disappeared. The surname alone could no longer tell the whole story. Which brings us to another familiar name, Ford. Today, Ford sounds unmistakably English. But for some Irish families, adopting a simpler English surname made life easier during periods of migration, especially when leaving Ireland for Britain, the United States, Canada, or Australia. Officials often struggled with Gaelic spellings and pronunciations. Some families chose to simplify their names voluntarily, while others found that the spelling written on immigration documents eventually became the surname future generations inherited. A single decision made at a dockside office could permanently change a family's identity. And that's why tracing Irish ancestry is rarely as straightforward as searching for one surname. Sometimes, the name you're looking for isn't the one your ancestors originally carried. If you thought those stories were surprising, the next surnames became even harder to trace because some families didn't simply translate their names. They abandoned them altogether. The surprising surname changes that fooled history. The next surname on our list may sound thoroughly English, Woods. Today, it's easy to assume the name simply describes someone who lived near a forest. And for many families, that's exactly what it did. But in Ireland, the story became far more complicated, as Gaelic surnames were gradually translated or simplified. Some families adopted familiar English surnames like Woods because they were easier to pronounce, easier to write, and easier to use in official records. By the time parish registers, census returns, and immigration documents were created, the older Gaelic surname had sometimes disappeared completely. Without earlier records, tracing the family's true origins became incredibly difficult. The next name is even more deceptive, Hart. At first glance, Hart appears to be another straightforward English surname. Yet several Irish families carrying older Gaelic names eventually adopted Hart because it sounded similar to parts of their original surname or provided a simpler English alternative. In other cases, English and Irish Hart families became so closely mixed that separating one lineage from another now requires careful genealogical research. It's a reminder that two people sharing the same surname may have completely different ancestral stories. Then there's a surname found across Ireland for centuries, Power. Unlike many names on this list, Power has strong Norman roots, arriving in Ireland shortly after the Norman invasion of the 12th century. Over generations, however, the family became deeply integrated into Irish society, with many branches adopting Irish customs, language, and traditions. By later centuries, distinguishing between families of Norman origin and those who had gradually become culturally Irish wasn't always straightforward. Once again, a surname revealed only part of the story. The next example may surprise many people, Walsh. Today, Walsh is one of Ireland's most common surnames. Ironically, the name doesn't originally describe an Irish family at all. It comes from the Old English word for Welsh. After the Norman invasion, many soldiers and settlers from Wales arrived in Ireland, and they became known simply as the Welsh. Over time, Walsh became their family surname. Yet as generations passed, these families became thoroughly Irish, marrying into Gaelic communities and spreading across the island. Today, countless people carrying the Walsh surname identify completely with their Irish heritage, even though the name itself points to a much older migration. History has a remarkable way of blending identities, which brings us to perhaps the most famous transformation of all, the quiet disappearance of the ancient prefixes, O and Mac. For centuries, these prefixes proudly identified families as descendants of a particular ancestor. But during periods of English administration, many families dropped them entirely. O'Connor became Connor. O'Brien became Brian. McCarthy became Carthy. Some later restored the prefixes, others never did. As a result, two families living side by side today may descend from the same medieval clan while carrying slightly different surnames. It wasn't always a deliberate attempt to hide their heritage. Sometimes it reflected changing fashions, sometimes official record-keeping, sometimes social pressure, and sometimes it was simply the easiest way to navigate a rapidly changing Ireland. But despite all these changes, one question still remains. If surnames could change so dramatically, how can anyone truly discover where their family came from? the truth your surname can't tell you. So, can an Irish surname really reveal your family's true origins? Sometimes, but never by itself. That's one of the biggest misconceptions in genealogy. A surname is a clue, not a conclusion. Throughout Irish history, names changed for countless reasons. Some families anglicized their surnames to fit into an English-speaking society. Others shortened names that officials struggled to pronounce or spell. Some restored their ancient O and Mac prefixes generations later. Others never did. And in many cases, completely unrelated families ended up sharing exactly the same surname. That's why two people named Smith, Walsh, or White may have entirely different family histories. One may descend from an ancient Gaelic clan, another from Norman settlers, another from English or Welsh migrants, and another from a family that simply adopted the name centuries later. The surname alone can never tell you which story belongs to your family. That's where the real journey begins. Professional genealogists rarely stop at a surname. Instead, they follow the evidence. Parish registers, census, records, Griffith's valuation, the tithe allotment books, old wills, land records, and increasingly, DNA testing. Each record becomes another piece of a puzzle that has been scattered across centuries. Sometimes that research confirms exactly what a family has always believed. Other times, it completely rewrites their story. A family convinced they were English may discover deep Gaelic roots. Another proud of an ancient clan connection may uncover Norman ancestry instead. History has a way of surprising us. And that's exactly why genealogy continues to captivate millions of people around the world. Because every family has a story. The challenge is discovering which parts have survived and which parts have been forgotten. So if your surname appeared on today's list, don't assume you've uncovered the entire truth. Instead, take it as an invitation. Dig deeper, ask questions, explore old records, speak to older relatives while you still can. Because somewhere in those forgotten documents may be the name your ancestors once carried, long before history changed it forever. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden stories behind Irish surnames, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Unknown Discoveries, and turn on notifications. Every week, we explore the forgotten history behind names, ancient kingdoms, lost bloodlines, and the remarkable people who shaped our world. Now we'd love to hear from you. What's your Irish surname, and where does your family come from? Share it in the comments below. Your story might inspire our next documentary, and you never know who else might recognize your family name. Until next time, keep exploring, because sometimes the greatest mystery in history is the one hiding inside your own surname.